you done now?
Never has there been a more exciting time to be alive. A time of rousing wonder and heroic achievement. As they said in the film, Back to the Future, where we're going, we don't need roads.
Oh, Brian, what have you done now?
Calculations are correct. When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, they're gonna see some serious shit.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
And welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast. The only podcast looking back in time for the greatest film trilogy of all time, Back to the Future. I'm your friend in time, Brad Gilmore. We have a great show for you today. Hope you enjoyed last week's time capsule with Kevin Perger from Defunct Land. I know we didn't really cover Back to the Future too much, a slight mention of it, but I found him by way of Back to the Future, as you heard in that interview. That's why it's a time capsule. Don't worry, it's not canon. It's not canon. It's not a part of the official season. But I just really wanted to share it with you all. And he's got a great YouTube channel, and he's got a great book out. So I definitely think that you should seek out that interview if you haven't already listened to it. That is Kevin Perger from Defunct Land, a great YouTube channel. But today on the show, we have a more Back to the Future-centric guest. We have Ian Doescher. Ian Doescher is the author of William Shakespeare's Get Thee Back to the Future, the new book that just hit stands everywhere. It is a part of the Pop Shakespeare series where Ian Doescher, who is a New York Times best-selling author, y'all might know him from William Shakespeare's Star Wars. He's venturing off now. His first book after the Star Wars books was now Back to the Future. He adapted the story in traditional Shakespearean English in iambic pentameter with Shakespearean rhyme. The back of the book actually says that every scene and every line of dialogue from the movies is recreated in authentic Shakespearean rhyme, meter, and stage directions. Woodcut-style illustrations add to the fun, along with inside jokes and Easter eggs from Huey Lewis call-outs to the inner thoughts of Einstein the dog. By Revel's End, you'll be convinced that Shakespeare had a time-traveling DeLorean of his own, speeding to our era to pin this tale. This is fun book, man. I have spent time reading it. And even on the back of the book, it says, "What lightning through yonder clock tower breaks?" And I've just been flipping through random pages here. You know, let's see here. I'm going to read a selection. Before we get into the interview with Ian Doescher, I'm going to read a selection from William Shakespeare's Get Thee Back to the Future. Let's see. This is page 44 of Get Thee Back to the Future. We are in the parking lot of the Twin Pines Mall. Marty has just seen the DeLorean time machine for the first time, and Doc is about to do temporal experiment number 1. And here we go. If every calculation is correct, when this, my baby, source of my hopes, doth hit the speed of 88 in miles per hour, then Marty, verily, thine eyes shall witness shit most serious. Marty, the car accelerates, yet does not move, but spins its tires faster and faster than a cyclone. It burneth rubber like a mighty pyre, and rocketh back and forth with energy. Each centimeter inching for release, the meter Doc doth hold goes up and up, and shows the speed potential rising higher, 20, 10, 20, 30, 40, and more than 60. Ian fleeter than a cheetah at a sprint. Doc flips a switch, now doth the car come. It groweth closer, like a comet that doth make its way across a starry heavens, and passes through the atmosphere of Earth. This comet, though seems bound to hit us both, thou approachest quickly like a bolt, with Einstein smiling happily inside. I am afraid, hath Doc lost his sense? It's my own friend, my doom. Fear not, Marty, behold. End scene. That is just a selection from Ian Doescher's Get Thee Back to the Future. I hope I didn't butcher that too much. I was a little bit too much into that. So we talk about him getting the idea for this book, but also starting back with his Star Wars trilogy idea, and also discuss something that I'm going to discuss further here maybe next week. I've said it every week on this show. I said that Back to the Future is the greatest trilogy of all time. And I had some friends in from L.A. over the weekend here in Houston. We did this event called the Movie Trivia Schmodown, which y'all heard the Back to the Future Schmodown. We did it live in a wrestling ring at Booker T World Gym Arena, and I was talking to Christian Harloff and a couple other guys who are movie reviewers and movie critics from L.A., Hollywood. And we had a really serious debate on, is Back to the Future the greatest trilogy of all time? And there's a lot of factors that go into it. Ian Doescher and I talk about it a little bit. I plan to have maybe Christian on the show so we can delve deeper into that conversation. But enjoy my takes and my conversation with Ian Doescher, author of William Shakespeare's Get Thee Back to the Future. And he joins me on the show right now, the author of William Shakespeare's Get Thee Back to the Future, Ian Doescher. Ian, how are you doing today, man?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to talk to you. So I saw this book perusing through Amazon one day, and I was like, there's no way this is a real book. And I had heard of, these William Shakespeare stories, for Star Wars or stuff like that. But I obviously I'm into Back to the Future. I keep up to date on everything, and I wasn't aware of the project. So when I saw it, I instantly bought it. And I don't think I've put the book down because I've been laughing so hard reading through some of these iconic scenes. Just before you called me, I was reading the scene where Doc is talking about his calculations, if thou art correct, and stuff like that. So tell me a little bit about the project, man. I know you've worked on these kind of books before. Where did the idea come from? How did it start? And just kind of walk me through the process.
Yeah, so I've done, a lot of these William Shakespeare's Star Wars books, and we decided, I mean Quirk Books and I, and my publisher, decided to branch out and do this Pop Shakespeare series where we are branching out into other films. And we had, over the years had talked about what other movies might get the Shakespearean treatment. And Back to the Future is one that I grew up with. I was 8 years old when it came out in 1985. And so it's, we had it on VHS when I was a kid and that kind of thing. And so it had always been sort of top of my list of one that I had wanted to do. And Quirk Books had done a children's book version of Back to the Future, not, just a year or two ago. And so they had already sort of worked out some of the licensing with Universal and working with Bob Gale and everything to get that done. So they thought this one might be one that could work. And we put together a proposal for Universal and for Bob Gale, and it was accepted. So we were able to get the licensing and make this book happen.
Did you speak with Bob Gale about the project at all? Did you have an opportunity to speak with him?
I did not speak with him directly, but he did write back in response to our proposal, he wrote back a poem to me about this project, which was a lot of fun. Definitely one of the top moments for me as an author.
Wait, so he wrote a poem? That is so. Did
he
write it in the vein of Shakespeare, or like what? Can you give me a little context? I'm not saying you have to read it, but what was the poem like?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of he sort of used some Shakespearean like language, and it was just about sort of his enthusiasm for the project. It was like 8 lines or something like that. It wasn't super long, but it was really sweet.
Oh, that's awesome. So, what was the genesis of it? I mean, obviously, maybe one day you came with the idea of what if I did Star Wars in Shakespearean English, but was Shakespeare something you studied in school, or what was the fascination with the Shakespearean style?
Yeah, so ever since I was a freshman in high school, that's when I started studying Shakespeare for the first time. We read Othello in my freshman year English class, and I was a theater nerd, and so I loved that we were reading a play in class. And I really, I sort of fell in love with the story and fell in love with, I really liked Iago as a villain. And I also, at the same time, our English teacher taught us about poetic meter, which as a person who had loved things like 'Twas the Night Before Christmas or Dr. Seuss, poetic meter made a lot of sense to me. And just everything sort of seemed to click at once. And so I loved Shakespeare really since back then. That's, more than 25 years ago now. And, it was also the same era that Kenneth Branagh was coming out with a lot of his Shakespearean adaptation movies and things like that. So it was a really good time to be a young person, sort of falling in love with Shakespeare.
And then you had, did you have any aspirations to be an author? Would you try to be a playwright of any kind? Was that kind of on your list, or were you eyeing that at all?
I thought that I might be an author and might write books, but I thought that they would probably be academic books. I have an academic background, and thought that might be sort of the route that I would go, and really did not imagine doing something like this until I had the idea for Shakespeare Star Wars, which was about 7 years ago.
And where was the germ of the idea? Were you watching, the original trilogy or something one day and was like, wait, it would be awesome if we broke this down as a 3-act play in Shakespearean English?
Yeah, it was sort of a combination of factors. So I did rewatch the trilogy. That was part of it. And then I read Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which was one of the first mashup books to become really popular. And then not too long after that, I went to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. I'm from Portland. I went to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival with my family. And so I kind of attribute it to having Star Wars and mashups and Shakespeare all bouncing around in my head at the same time. And I had the idea, like, wow, it would be really fun to take Star Wars and rewrite it as though it were a play by Shakespeare. That was, and I was the sort of person who, sort of nerd who over the years had, tried my hand at writing an iambic pentameter a little bit, written the occasional sonnet, that kind of thing. So this was not, out of the realm of possibility for me.
Well, but, it's one thing, like, I think everyone has had the idea of, like, oh, wouldn't this be a great idea, I don't know, for an invention or a television show or a book, but not many people act on it and try to actually do it. How did you get started on the Star Wars, where you said, okay, here's my idea, let me go pitch a publisher, let me talk to Quirk Books, let me see how I can get my foot in the door? Or how did you get it from, a germ of an idea to an actual piece of literature?
Yeah, I mean, this is really where my sort of dumb luck started. I looked up Quirk Books online, and their editor's email address was there on their website. And so I just sent him an email, and I said, you've never heard of me because I've never written anything, but I have this idea, and I'm wondering if you think it has any legs. And he wrote back and said, well, that's an interesting idea, and if you actually write something, let me know, and I will take a look at it. And so, that was enough motivation. I think if he hadn't written back to me, or if he had maybe if his response had been different, I'm not sure I would have done it. But the fact that he said that he would read it if I wrote it, inspired me to go ahead, and I put together the first act, so the first fifth of Shakespeare Star Wars, and sent that back to him about 3 weeks later. And that was when he called me up and he said, okay, I really want to do this. And the next step is we got to get Lucasfilm on board. And he had a contact with Lucasfilm because they had done a book with them a few years back. And so I think, I think it helped for Lucasfilm. It helped that it wasn't just me, random person, coming and saying, hey, I want to do this. I had, at that point, had a publisher who would actually publish the book if they wanted to move forward with it. So, like I say, I mean, it was, I call it dumb luck because I really did not know what I was doing, but it all worked out.
Now, would you have been able to do these books without, Lucasfilm signing off on it? Could you not have done it without their stamp of approval?
I mean, I think that's probably up for debate. I mean, these, you certainly, could make an argument for just doing these as parodies, and therefore you don't have to worry about getting the licensing. And that was never something. It's just kind of not the way that Quirk Books does a lot of things. And I mean, the fact that we did get the licensing means that then we're also sort of plugged into the Star Wars marketing machine. And so, that obviously helps open doors to audiences and that kind of thing. Star Wars fans, especially, even more so than many other movie franchises, I think, they know what's officially sanctioned and what's not. So, and they sort of have their antennas up for that. So, I think it probably did serve us well. And of course, avoided any question of whether or not it was legal.
Yeah, well, yeah. Just out of curiosity, so you work on these books. You get a good feedback. I mean, when you first went to the bookstore or on Amazon or wherever you first saw the book, I mean, was it somewhat of a surreal moment? Here I was watching the original trilogy, and all of a sudden I got this book on the shelves.
Oh, it was wildly surreal. I mean, 7 years later, it's still sort of surreal.
Did you do
to
anything
sort of
special
turn
to
everything
commemorate it
thinking.
or anything like that?
Let's see. I guess the sort of the most special thing I've done to commemorate it is, I've done a few things. A friend and I took a trip down to Lucasfilm to meet my contact down there, which was sort of a geek pilgrimage for us. And I had seen this person online who had a guy had commissioned basically sort of a Shakespearean Darth Vader helmet that's it's metal and it looks sort of looks like a metal knight's helmet or something like that. And so I had the same guy make me one of those. I think that's probably my wife would probably say that's the biggest thing I've done to commemorate it.
Okay, and then okay, these books are successful. People like them, and you go to Quirk. Y'all are talking about doing this Pop Shakespeare series, and here we are, Back to the Future. You get the 8-line poem from Bob Gale. You're off to the races. So what's the process, though? I mean, okay, you start watching the first film, obviously. Do you look for a script online and try to take a line from the script and then say, okay, let me Shakespeare-ish this stuff, or what's the process?
Yeah, so basically, I will watch the movie just a little bit at a time, right? So I'll listen through a line or two of dialogue, and if I need to go look at the script online, I will do that, because sometimes, a word is unclear, or there might be a name that's referred to that I'm not catching or something like that. And so sometimes I'm doing that. Sometimes I'm looking up things. This was the case with Back to the Future, and also the case with the Star Wars movies. If there's some sort of lore or something like that I'm not quite understanding, then there are places online you can go to find that sort of information. But basically, I just sort of worked my way through bit by bit, and as I'm going through, I think, well, not only how is this going to go in iambic pentameter, and not only where can I use some of Shakespeare's language here and his vocabulary, maybe a direct reference to some of his lines, but then also, what can I do to inject some comedy here, or inject some, extra sense of what the character might be feeling in this moment. Originally, I had written 5 speeches for Marty that were all 88 lines long, and one of the bits of feedback from Universal and Bob Gale was that 5 was maybe a little too many. So now in the finished version of the book, it's 2 speeches that are that long. So it's things like that, little sort of Easter egg-ish kind of things that I like to throw in. Adding Marty from Back to the Future 2 into the scene where Marty and Lorraine are in the car together. That was one of those things where I was writing on it. I was writing and I was working on it, and I just kind of couldn't resist. There they were in the car together, and I thought to myself, gosh, I know what happens. We all know what happens in Back to the Future 2 while this scene is happening. So why not go ahead and make a nod to that with with basically the second Marty coming in and having a quick speech during that scene. And that's the sort of thing that, I never know when I do something like that, whether or not the movie studios are going to let me do it. At this point, my philosophy is basically like, put it in, try it. And if they, the worst they can say is no. Right. And so that was one of those that I stuck in, and they didn't say anything about it.
So how long from, beginning of the project, sitting down, watching the movie for the first time, to start working on the dialogue, from that moment on, how long does it take for you to complete this?
Well, from that moment until actual publication was probably somewhere around a year. But to write the first draft of the manuscript was a couple of months. And so the process is that I will spend a couple of months working on the manuscript. I will go back and do a full pass through of edits on my own. Then it goes off to Quirk Books. They will give me a round of edits. Then it goes off to the movie studio. They will give me a round of edits back. And at that point we are, getting closer to a more final draft. it gets laid out, in the way it's going to actually look in the book. And then we go through and do another round of edits just to make sure that nothing got, misspelled or put in the wrong place. And even then, the published book, I'll never forget the day that I received my very first book in the mail. This was William Shakespeare's Star Wars. And I started reading it to my kid and noticed a typo on like the third page. It was pretty funny. So these things still slip through, it still does happen. But all those rounds of edits, you hope that you're getting most of that. And sometimes, I always, because I'm anal about these kinds of things, I always go back to my manuscript to see whether the error was mine or happened somewhere in the process. And I would say it's about 50-50, frankly.
Well, okay, so you live with this thing for a year, but let's talk about the films, because the films are the movie, especially the first movie, is why you wanted to write this. You said you were a young kid when you saw Back to the Future for the first time in 1985. What was it about the movie that captured you?
I mean, my family was a family that loved sci-fi, right? So I was raised on Star Wars and Star Trek and that kind of thing. So sci-fi was already, a genre that I loved. The movie it's funny. It has characters that you can identify with. It's just a good story. The movie totally holds up to this day, which is, kind of remarkable, which I actually think has more to do with the fact that most of it takes place in 1955, right? And so a lot of it was set in the past, in a past that is not changing, right? So some movies from the 80s can feel very 80s, whereas that movie, most of it takes place in the past, and so it doesn't feel, I think, as dated as it could. And so I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say what captures your imagination as a kid, but just everything from how sort of zany and crazy Christopher Lloyd is in Back to the Future. Michael J. Fox, of course, I had watched, I grew up watching Family Ties. So, there he was, and he was great. And, all the performances are so good in it that there's not a person who's, sort of the weak link or anything like that. So I don't know. I just grew up loving it.
Now, and I'm in the same boat with you. I mean, I like to tell people this: all the movies came out, all three films came out before I was even born. So I had to go back and revisit them in the late '90s is when I first saw them as a kid, and still, it never even I never even had the thought of, oh, this movie seems a little old. It has lasted forever, and I just got to watch the trilogy with my nephews for the first time, maybe like 3 or 4 months ago. And they're born in this decade, in the 2010s, and they still resonate with it. So it is something about the movie. It doesn't date, and maybe you're right. Maybe it's the fact that they go back for so much of the movie to 1955 that's why we don't look at it like a typical 80s movie. But let me talk to you about this. So you did the trilogy of the Star Wars books. Back to the Future is also in a trilogy. I had some friends in from L.A. over the weekend, and we had this conversation at dinner about Back to the Future, the trilogy. Is it the greatest trilogy of all time? Now, Star Wars to me doesn't count because now it's a saga. There are 9 films that are going to be in this one story. There's a few other ones you can throw in and out. Indiana Jones isn't a trilogy anymore because there's a 4th one. There's going to be a 5th one. A lot of stuff like that. Toy Story, now it's having a 4th one. Is Back to the Future the greatest trilogy of all time?
Wow, that's an interesting question. And I'd have to sit and think about that one, to go through the other trilogies. I mean,
there aren't. I guess my point is there aren't a lot of just pure trilogies anymore. Everything is kind of over
true,
time
yeah.
They've added to the stories.
I mean, I'm tempted to say something like The Godfather, but that's such a weird case because that's one where the first 2 are so incredible and the third one is so not incredible,
right.
And so. That one's hard because it's not as sort of evenly distributed as Back to the Future is. But I mean, possibly. I think that's a really interesting question. Now you're going to send me off to go look up other trilogies and figure this out for myself.
I think we got to get to the bottom of it. So for me, when I was a kid, 1 was a perfect movie. And then as I got older, I really grew an affinity for Back to the Future 3. I think 2 is kind of properly rated. I think there's a lot of iconic things from part 2 that people kind of look past, like the Pepsi Perfect or the hoverboard. A lot of these things that are synonymous with the Back to the Future trilogy came from Back to the Future Part 2. But in your personal rankings, how do you rank the films?
Well, I will confess that I have seen 2 and 3 far, far fewer times than I've seen 1. So I've seen 2 and 3 probably not more than about 3 times each.
Oh,
Whereas
wow.
the first one I've seen dozens of times, right? So we have to take that with a, like, my rankings are going to have a big grain of salt next to them. I would love to go back and spend more time with 2 and 3 and that, and get to know them better. So for now, I do think my ranking is actually the order of the films. I do like 3, and I like the Western setting. 2, I think they were so. I mean, I guess I like how sort of crazy they are with the whole storyline, and just how much it flips into different. First they're in 1955, and they're in 1985, they're in 2015, and how much it flips back and forth and deals with the various consequences of different actions. Like, that to me is a lot of fun. And you're absolutely right. There are so many iconic things from Back to the Future 2 that we all just think of as part of the trilogy.
Right.
And so for me, I think the order is 1, 2, 3.
It's hard. I think with anything, you can ask, anybody's favorite movies or favorite musicians or favorite food. On any given day, you're going to have a different answer. It just depends on how you're feeling that day and what resonates with you. Sometimes 3 is my favorite movie. I don't know why. It just is sometimes. But you talk about you did the Star Wars books. Now you're starting on Back to the Future. Are there plans to go to Back to the Future 2 and 3? I know you've only seen them now 6 times combined, but would you like to continue this series for William Shakespeare's Get Thee Back to the Future?
I think it's totally undetermined at this point. I think it's possible that I'll end up doing them. I think it could certainly be fun to do. And I also think that it's possible that we'll just do the first one and move on to other things. The conversation has not, it sort of has been talked about a little bit with me and Quirk Books, but not in a serious let's move on this kind of way. So so I don't know yet, and I hope I'll know more sometime.
Well, the story is to be continued, so hopefully we see something more from you in the Back to the Future universe. But are there any other properties that you say, man, I would love to jump all over that and do, I don't know, Indiana Jones or do a James Bond or something like that? Is there another franchise or property that you're eyeing right now?
I have thought about James Bond because it would be fun to do in some ways, maybe do some sort of an amalgam of different movies. It would also be, it would be fun to do something like Star Trek. Although the question there then becomes like, well, what do you do? Do you pick one of the movies? Do you pick a series of episodes? How do you do that? The one that I seriously have my eye on is The Princess Bride, because again, being a child of the 80s, growing up with that movie, I would love to do that and bring in some elements from William Goldman's book into it. So that's the one that is sort of on my wish list.
Okay, I would like to see Princess Bride. You got Andre the Giant in it. You can't go wrong, Ian. You can't go wrong with Andre the Giant. But I really appreciate you taking the time. The book is William Shakespeare's Get Thee Back to the Future. You can get the book on Amazon.com is where I got my copy. I'm sure wherever books are sold, it's part of the great series of William Shakespeare books. William Shakespeare Star Wars is another one y'all got to go check out. Ian, let the people know, though, where they can find you, follow you, and keep in touch with you about your upcoming projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I am on all the social media, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram as Ian Doescher, which is Doescher. And I also have a website, iandescher.com.
IanDescher.com. Well, enjoy beautiful Portland, Oregon. Every time I think about Portland, Oregon, there's this Thai place in downtown Portland. I think it's called East Sands. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. Yeah.
Oh my
Good
gosh,
place.
it's delicious. Everybody needs to go check out the Pad Thai at East Sands and go say hello to my man Ian Doescher. IanDescher.com. Get the book. Get the Back to the Future available now. Ian, thanks so much, man.
All right. Thank you.
You have a good one.
Oh, Brad, what have you done now? Oh, Brad, what have you done now?